Okay, we are live again. I'm going to give people some time to find this new link and hopefully join back on to view. We are streaming again from the Facebook page for Emancipation Day STC, as well as Matter of Black, as well as Brock University and First Ontario Performing Arts Center's Facebook and YouTube channels. We have some viewers, so I'm going to start popping in the panelists on screen as they join and hand over my feed to Lennox. So Katawi, I'm going to hand it over to you first and start popping everybody in.
Thanks so much. Thanks to everyone for moving over onto this platform and understanding and empathizing with the tech issues. It's greatly appreciated. And Lennox is coming back, so we can hear more of what Lennox is saying, and he can continue his thoughts. For those that are just joining us, we were referencing the question of where were you in 1992, in addition to how did the times and events represented in the film impact on you personally and or professionally? Lennox, if you'd like to continue your thought for the folks in the audience and for us on the panel as well.
Thanks for the technical wizardry. I'm seeing here, I'm just amazed. I was just born just during World War II, the end of it, so you can just imagine that for me, seeing this stuff is like out of the world. What I hope to do, based on the correspondence I had, with two things. One is to give an idea of the kind of the background, the context in which the BATC was formed, Black Action Defense Committee. It's linked to the revolt on Yonge Street, and then conclude sometime, I wouldn't do it all at once, with regards to the link between slavery, the patrollers, the runaways, and those of us today who are considered at large by the police, that kind of thing. So that's okay with you. Quickly, again, the climate within which the BATC was formed was, it wasn't overheated, it was normal. For us, the shooting, the arresting, person like myself, I was stopped 9 times in one particular year, at least 9 times. And questioned because I looked like someone who had robbed a bank or some such thing. And it really got to me to think that when the police saw me, they didn't see a professional teacher, they didn't see a writer, a parent, a married person, a person who grew with parents who expected the best of us. At age 15, my parents had us reading Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, that sort of stuff, because they wanted us to feel a sense of great value to ourselves and to the world in which we live. So in addition to the harassing pullovers, the humiliation, the pull out of the car, spread you on the bonnet of the vehicle in February, with your family in the car looking on. I look back at those times and I still feel a sense of deep grievance about it, being pulled over and humiliated in front of my family a number of times. But they were scared of it. My wife on occasion, when she asked an officer, why did you pull us over? Excuse the French, she called her an NB, and made her a bitch. That's what he called her. That's what came out of his mouth. As a husband or spouse. So that time was a time of, as I look back at it now, well, the BATC then, in 1988-1990, we finally had a meeting with the Peterson government in Ontario at that time. It had come about again with the killing of another black man. 2 people were shot that year. I think one was a woman who was paralyzed. And Lester Donaldson, in his room, he was ill. People said he was schizophrenic. He was in the bedroom making noises. The police came, went upstairs. And I'm going on what the reports we heard. And shot him behind his mattress or so. When the gentleman who was shot earlier this year in Brampton, I think, when it happened, my mind went so in a stark way back to Lester Donaldson, because so the officer went to trial, etc., etc. And he won. He won. He was acquitted. Came out, and he came out with his cowboy boots on and puffing a cigar at us. That set off a kind of a rage among us, and that is when the Black Action Defense Committee was formed. The SIU, however, came after. BAT was formed in '88. I think in 1990, there was the Peterson government was in power, in office. And the ongoing agitation, the demonstrations and so, forced the government to have a meeting with us. We met with the Peterson government on the southeast corner of Parliament Building, southeast corner. And I can't remember seeing a table, a very long table, long mahogany table, at least about 8 to 10 feet in length. And we sat at one end of the table, and the only documents that were on the table were our documents. People like Charlie Roach, Cole Benjamin, etc. And the Peterson people, they didn't sit with us. They stood up. They stood on one end of the left side of the table, and we sat. And they proceeded then to take concerns, and then the SIU, the Special Investigative Unit, was formed. Ostensibly, we understood that it was the first of its kind in any territory in the British Commonwealth country, where we had and the objective was civilian oversight and police misbehavior. It had to be independent of the police and the police union. But as I mentioned earlier on, in 2011, Ombudsman Marin at that time, who investigated the SIU and the ministry responsible for oversight, came to the conclusion that the ministry was actively working against the director of the SIU. And later on, the Toronto Star asked questions on whose side is the government when it came to the function of the SIU and the community, because the shootings continued, the arrests continued. Eventually, we had the carding issues, and it's been an ongoing harassment. Anyone can be pulled over at any time, and any consequence could also occur to you. My wife was charged falsely with shoplifting in one mall in the west end of Toronto, but she wasn't charged for shoplifting there. The police said she had shoplifted 2 weeks before, 2 Sundays before, at another mall in Scarborough. So here she was, arrested in this mall 2 weeks later for shoplifting, accused in another mall in Scarborough. Well, the police miscalculated, because the Sunday when they said that she had done that, she had been at a banquet on the Danforth, and 88 people could testify that she was there, including a priest, the bartender, she didn't use alcohol, you don't use alcohol, and 2 provincial members of parliament. We sued the police, and they were forced to compensate her. But she fell ill, and that short her teaching career. I still feel sort of deep grief when I think about that. I wish she'd blame me sometimes, because I didn't run for election. I've been advised by a city council who knew me, we were NDP, to run for election and have a public profile of where I stood, things like drugs and that kind of stuff. And so that's when the Bobbery government came in. I got 9,000 votes. I didn't win, but the police in my neighborhood, when they passed, instead of saying, let out, they said, oh, Mr. Farrell. That's the kind of childish behavior by people who carry guns.
And we're seeing a lot of that today, which I think definitely actually begs into the next question. So I think, providing.
So that is where the SIU was formed, and but I can the Bobbery government came in after, and under Stephen Lewis, brilliant and very thoughtful man, tried to implement some of the provisions which the SIU would have had. The Bobbery government was out of power shortly after. They'll get a lot of resistance from other groups, because among the things that the investigator of all this, Stephen Lewis said he discovered that there's a new kind of racism, anti-black racism. Because among the other groups who had been there, who were themselves suffering from different cultural groups, community groups, they were turning against us, saying that we were getting special treatment. We were already getting special treatment from the police. Bobby government fell out of power, and we had then the Mike Harris government. And I'll finish on this point and come back later on to the other points I mentioned. Mike Harris, when he came in, one of our major challenges with Bobry and letting institutions aware was the number of our young people. There was what's called the classroom, the prison pipeline. So from the classroom to the prison, because of the detention of young men, black men, etc., etc. And we always thought it curious that when Mike Harris came into office, he didn't attend to any of those issues at all. But he built in Canada the first not-for-profit prison on Canadian soil, Penitentiary Machine. It was later taken over by the government because it was bankrupt and so, but that's what he gave us as a gift to our community. The first not-for-profit prison, because there is an ongoing relationship between racism, poverty, black communities, and the industrialization of the prison system. I'll stop at that point and come back then under your direction.
Thank you so much. I want to actually pull from that and move on to one of the other questions that I think a lot of folks might be able to provide some insights to, especially given the themes that you brought up. Toni Morrison explains that racism has a goal of distraction. And that was some of the themes that I noticed from what you were saying. So I was wondering if other folks as well could speak to, in what ways do we see this narrative presented in Canada? And by this, I ask, how does distraction play in dialogues around racism and anti-Blackness in Canada? Whether that be you pull from the film or your work, I think that that might be really insightful. If you'd like to speak, go ahead, Lennox.
I'm following your cues. New to me. I'm trying to
Go ahead.
Should I continue on the same vein or?
Absolutely. If you think, and if you think that you want to tie to aspects of how
okay. I thought that
of distraction, or also to how it connects to themes of what happened in 1992 with the Black Lives Matter movement today as well. So those are some other areas that I think might help.
I thought I wouldn't serve the whole meal at serving slices, but then I can. So the Stephen Lewis report, a watershed report, identified anti-Black racism. That had come on the heels of the uprising that took place on Yonge Street. That is the beating of Rodney King. And a young man had also been shot recently by the police. So those two things coincided. I forget the young man's name. He was shot in an alleyway. The police said he came at them with a knife. There were no witnesses. And the SIU had become really, with all respect, a lapdog for the police services. They could do what they wanted, whatever was done. So they have the revolt, and many of the issues continued. Deadly laws came and passed. And we realized that it was the number of instances which continued under the SIU showed that it had become an arm, not for the community, but of the, I'm not saying it was for the police, but of them, because it couldn't we couldn't get the kinds of expectations that we hoped for. The stopping started, the carding came through, and the ongoing thing, and the destroying of lives all over the place. People were, if my wife, for example, we hadn't beaten that charge, she'd have had a criminal record and she'd lost her job teaching, and today she couldn't go anywhere. The effect on her lives is significant. When you were stopped by the police, anything could happen to you. Anything could happen to you. And it became so frequent that on one occasion I remember traveling and seeing a police car behind me. And I remember how my stomach felt tied into knots, expecting to be pulled over. And you can't imagine the rage that surges through me when I realized you couldn't pull me over because I was in a streetcar in public transit. That's the kind of effect it's having on us. And so here was the SIU. Here we were. Bobby Governor had come, I had run. Dudley had been charged, and it's a constant harassing. And Black Lives Matter. It's just another page, another chapter in the book with the same title and the same themes. That's what it is. And I was pausing to get some clues for you if I should go on to the issue of slavery and policing. But I'd follow your cues, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. In terms of the idea of it being a page of the same book, it's like Malcolm X said, racism's like a Cadillac. They come out with a new model every year. Yeah. So I definitely think that that's really great. Thank you so much. For some folks specifically in the Niagara region, I'm wondering, what are the ties between anti-Black racism, Black history, because St. Catharines even specifically was one of the last stops of the Underground Railroad. What are some of the ways that you see those things interwoven here with activism, with how you felt when you viewed the film, the dialogues that are happening here? If some folks would like to speak on that. Gervin, would you like to speak to that, especially being one of the only Black university president in Canada? Maybe, speaking to what some of those dialogues look like here might be salient.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. And I think this discussion is very important. I think the film is very important. Your starting point in terms of the history of this region, and particularly with the act of the Refugee Slave Act in the U.S. 1855 dates back a little bit before that, that resulted in the Underground Railroad being very prominent in the St. Catharines area. The history of the entire southern Ontario, from Buxton, Colchester, so the entire region going right back to the Loyalists from the American Revolution. So I think that in this region, there's been a long history of demonstrated resistance to social injustice. I believe that in many regards, what was happening in 1992, at least at the first phase of the protests, was a reaction to bring attention to what was seen as social injustice. I think what happened on the march up also demonstrates that social injustice unaddressed can boil over and can, in some senses, be on control. And I think we see that at times in terms of the Black Lives movement, where there's a very defined narrative and goal and attempt to bring attention to, at times, even graphic injustice. But we also see at times pain or hurt unattended can also boil over. And what it means then, I think, for all of us, that in whatever walks of life we have, that paying attention to social injustice, paying attention to ensuring that we're building inclusive societies and inclusive institutions become really important, because otherwise individuals who either feel voiceless or who feel their voices are unheard then are left with few avenues, but avenues of protest. And again, protests can take different paths at time. So in some senses, I also think it motivated a lot of action. In fact, if one takes a look at that period in the 1990s, it did trigger a lot of action. But again, without persistence, some of them, these actions wane and need renewal and need constant examination and critical reflection, which I think is what the panel is doing today as well. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much. I think that even just in my mind, one of the things that came next then is thinking about when I watched the film, Lennox said that believing in truth is not enough. You know, to believe in it as an ideal isn't enough. And he goes on to explain that believing in the truth and that we are all equal in front of the law isn't enough. So noting this and seeing that we're all in university spaces, I'm wondering and thinking within the academy, in which ways, if any, does this belief in truth being insufficient present itself? You may, whether it be through your work, your teaching, whatever roles it is that you occupy. So I recognize that's a big question if folks want to take a little bit of time to think, but I would love to hear from Adil or Jean. I know that you two haven't spoken yet, so if you two would like to take the lead on that question.
I think, thank you so much for asking. If maybe you can just sort of narrow that down for me, are you speaking sort of in the context of research and scholarship, or just sort of like in general? Because I think when I hear what Lennox said, there are a few things that come to mind, most certainly. I think first and foremost, we can look at this particular political moment, pardon me, that being the pandemic and as well as the killing of George Floyd, that of Regis Korchinski Paquette, DeAndre Campbell. And what we see is, anyway, at least in my institution and many institutions across Canada, is that a lot of institutions are saying that they're now sort of thinking about anti-Black racism, are committed to anti-Black racism, have said, in fact, that they've been speaking and addressing the issue of anti-Black racism for some time. However, Black people aren't new in the context of Canada. I think that certainly Gervin spoke to that, and Lennox spoke to that as well. And so I think that this idea that this particular push, be it George Floyd or this particular COVID pandemic, having institutions really consider the impacts on Black and Indigenous peoples is quite troublesome. And so when I think about that, and I think about these kinds of sort of statements, commitments, or, you know, whatever that they're trying to do in relation to Black people, I think that, you know, my research and my work focuses on Black people particularly. And I think that when we think about how many Black people are working in institutions, what are the conditions while they work in those institutions, what are the levels of success and promotion within those institutions, what does that look like in the context of research, in the context of who gets certain kinds of funding, in the context of how promotion works, in the context of how we are understood as collegial or not, what kind of material or pedagogical practices that we have in the classroom. These are all related to truth. They're all, for me, related to and always connected to anti-Blackness and the impacts of that, not just within the classroom, but certainly within the community. And so the issues for some people, that what the idea of believing in truth, like what Lennox is saying, is some people acted like seeing what happened to George Floyd is new. And it's not. Because we watched here in Canada, in Ottawa, Ontario, we watched Abdirahman Abdi get beaten by Officer Daniel Monteson, actually on TV, right? We also watched the video of Andrew Loku here in Toronto get shot in less than 21 seconds, specifically by Andrew Doyle, the Toronto Police Service, right? And so there are many other cases like that. So the fact that we know the health conditions of Black people, we know the housing conditions of Black people, we know sort of the economic disparities for Black people, we know racism happens, we understand over policing. In fact, again, both Lennox and Gervin both gave us sort of the history around the pass laws and slave laws and how all of these things are connected, right? So to act like there's anything new here is actually what the issue is. The issue is there's nothing new here. The concern is, and particularly in my university, and more specifically in my my faculty, the Faculty of Community and Social Services, our dean, Dr. Lisa Barnoff, put out a set of actions and responses and like sort of timelines and plans around what the faculty is going to do, as opposed to really thinking about, oh, we're really sorry, or we've come to sort of light around this, right? And that for me is actually what's more meaningful about truth, because truth is not just the conversation and the reflection. Truth is also action. And truth is also moving us forward and making those commitments in ways that don't have Black people wasting all of their advocacy and academic time running after an institution to take Black life seriously.
Thank you. You nailed that. I mean, you didn't need me to clarify anything. You answered exactly in a way that was super effective. Jean, Simon, did you want to speak to that or add to that in any way?
Yeah. If I may just add in a couple of ideas, I think our institutions like universities and colleges can be very instrumental in showing how things have been going on, how there is nothing new, especially by comparing comparative approaches, looking into what's going on here and there, the globality. If you look into what's going on in the global world, you will notice that anti-Black racism is almost the same in any country, all the world, be it in Middle East, be it in the Maghreb, be it in Africa, Southern Asia, be it in North America and South America. It's always the same, nothing new. So what can be done is that academic institutions can help with showing those trends and pointing to what's going on, what's not working, adding race-based data collection and interpretation. I think that's something that is very important. And also members of the academia, especially members of Black African descent, can be very helpful by linking with the community, as Walter Rodney said, grounding with the community for knowledge exchange. Community have a lot to teach, and academy has also lots to teach and lots to learn. Let's say the new Africana Studies program that we are going to start at Brock this semester could be, I think, an ideal place where to explore those important ideas and connect with the community.
Thank you so much. Simon, did you want to speak to that question or any of the previous questions that have been asked? Sorry. You don't have to. I'm just wanting to ensure that everyone gets opportunity to speak.
No, I did see that people who are watching had a question about the context of Black history in Niagara and the erasure of Black history in Niagara. And I think there is something that's illustrative of that erasure, the contemporary Black history and of anti-Black racism in Niagara. If you go down in downtown St. Catharines to Geneva Street, you'll find the Salem Chapel BME Church, which was built by formerly enslaved peoples. This is where the legendary Underground Railroad conductor Harriet Tubman worshipped throughout the 1850s and planned her raids that brought so many more people of African descent north to freedom. But that's in keeping with what most Canadians understand as Black history in Canada. That Canada was the North Star for enslaved peoples. It was a place of freedom. If you go down into the basement of that church, what you will find is a museum that looks and explores the struggles of Black Canadians in St. Catharines and the Niagara region, really from Emancipation Day onwards. Struggles against anti-Black racism in the labor market and the workplace, struggles against racial discrimination in housing, struggles against anti-Black racism in the school system, and so on. Most people visit that church, and I think it's a metaphor for how most Canadians think about Black history. Most people visit that church and they stay on that main floor and they see the bust of Harriet Tubman. But if they go down below into the basement, they'll see that the struggle against anti-Blackness, against the dehumanization of Black people in Canada does not end with Emancipation Day. in fact, it carries on. And that's what I hope our film, It Takes a Riot, Race, Reform, and Rebellion, illustrates, that the struggle against anti-Black racism is not something that's historic, but the Black freedom movement and that struggle is very much ongoing and it's very much present. And I was happy to see so many people, a multiracial crowd of people march in early June for the Black Lives Matter rally in Niagara. So I hope we are turning a corner as far as allyship amongst non-Black people and the recognition that anti-Blackness is still something that shapes the lives, the experiences, and the opportunities of Black Canadians and of Black people in Niagara.
Can I add something to the context that was just mentioned on 2 points? One is the history of the Niagara region, St. Catharines in particular, with the Niagara region. And I think the narrative and the outline, I live just a couple streets away from the church that Harriet Tubman went to. So I think a very iconic location. But also in St. Catharines in 1812, a part of the war time period that becomes really defining for Canada. Pierrepoint, for example, formed a significant Black militia that fought alongside General Brock, along with Tecumseh from the Indigenous communities as well. And I think it's important for Canada, for Canadians, to be able to recognize the broad context of historical contributions of Black Canadians to the shaping of Canada. The question that was raised by my colleague at Ryerson, which I think is a valid one in the sense of what has changed. And in some senses, I think it's correct. Some things have not changed. But in 1992, I became a part-time instructor at Ryerson. And at that time, I can think of how many Canadian universities, I know there were at a number of Canadian universities Black professors, but not many. Today, I'm on the line with so many professors, either looking at Black studies or Black professors and the likes. I think one thing that's really changed in Canadian institutions is that those individuals who are looking at Black studies, looking at Black issues, those individuals who identify as Black professors as well, have obligation of being a voice for many of the individuals who were on the street in 1992 who did not have that voice available to them. And as a result, then, I think, much as was being said in 1992, a wide range of individuals across the community served as a voice. Today, individuals, I'm a president of a university. In 1992, there were no Black presidents of a Canadian university. So I think that we have to make sure that those individuals who are either from the community, have sentiment, care about what's happening in the community, care about Canada as a whole, that we are all then as a resource to be able to lend our capacity to build the kind of society that people say they'd like to see. And the question is, now we need to act in making that truth be realized. So it's not sufficient. I agree with Lennox. It's not sufficient to either say or know the truth. It's a necessary condition for us to act on the truth.
Thanks, Gervin. I think that's a really important point that you share. I guess the only thing that I would add is, what does it mean from 92 to now, from the point where you spoke about you first being within the institution and now you being the only Black president in 2020? And so when we're thinking about the marker of what we're assessing and what we're looking at as moving forward, or what that kind of success means, or that the role for Black people within the academy should be, to quote you, to give voice to things that happened in 92, et cetera. I guess my invitation, or my thinking, and certainly I'm not a university president, I've certainly not been in the academy for as long as you have, But my question is, one, what are we measuring and marking? And where do we begin to do that, right? And then my other question is, what does it mean for Black people and Black scholars and Black researchers to be consistently, quote, being the voice to those moments of crises, right? So to those moments of pain, quote unquote pain, to those quote moments of slavery and marking and so forth. Like, if that is also my only role in the academy, then I have other questions then about the markings of success and what I'm to do within the academy, right? And I think about, for example, some of my white colleagues who write about things like dancing all day long, right? So when I think about freedom and emancipation, that's what freedom is for me. Freedom and emancipation is also not only being in a role where, one, I am still the only one, right? Where there's only a few people, where still, you know, to this day, while I'm glad that there's some Black professors who are easily getting tenure, moving up in those places, that is not the reality. I'm going to speak specifically for Black women, for Black queer and trans people, for Black Muslims and Black people at many other intersections, right? Black people with disabilities. So again, if we're here talking about emancipation and freedom, to quote my good colleague at U of T, Dr. Ronaldo Walcott, it is a long emancipation, but I want us to have these tenuous kind of conversations that bring out better texture in what we're saying, right? Bring out texture from then to now, right? Talk about the fact that, yeah, absolutely. What does it mean to have an entire research program that is actually looking at death and pain and abolition and undoing the very institution where, yes, my brother, you are a president in, right? So if we talk about emancipation, we're talking about freedom, I also think it's important that we kind of speak using the same kind of taxonomies or logic, because my freedom is, one, to not have to be always doing that work, right? My freedom is also not celebrating one or two. My freedom is not starting at an extremely low baseline and being happy that there are few of us, and my role in the institution is to undo it, right? And so I think about that consistently in my role as a Black woman in the academy and what I'm doing in that space. So I think I'd just like to also insert that sort of in conversation with what you've shared.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind reflecting on that, but I see Lennox would like to go ahead, and I surely would want to wait. Oh, he's got a technical consideration. So I'll speak in the interim until he's available to speak.
I also see that Lana also has her hand up, just to note as well after you're done, Gervin.
Okay. What I would say is that so why don't I talk about a few statements of obligation, at least in my mind. One obligation, I think, is personal, is that I have an obligation not to be the only or the last Black president. I think as scholars, you have an obligation not to be the last. That means then that there's a generation of individuals who are looking towards you for inspiration and are looking towards you to ask, how do you maneuver through these challenges, yet continue to contribute in your field, which could be any field, and yet also maintain a connection to a community that needs your social capital. So in a sense, there is a conflict. And I also don't believe that one needs to necessarily feel themselves to be called upon to be the expert or the representative on all issues at all times. Not sure what just happened there. But what I would say is that it's important then that we all make sure that we maintain our capacity and maintain our hopefulness for the community as well in that respect. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I see that Delana has a hand up, would like to say something. So go ahead, Delana.
Right. So I think this is a really good conversation. For myself, I just want to say that without the political advocacy of other educators, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So I mentioned at the beginning, where were you, 1992? I was making my way within the profession of teaching when there were a majority of white female middle class young women. And as a racialized Black woman, it was a very difficult process to make my way within in this profession. So it was due to the fact of the advocacy of people that have been in the field and believed in social change in the field. And I think to some extent, our histories do play a role in the choices that we go forward to make in the work that we do to make a difference. So it becomes part of, I think, and I'm speaking for myself now, it's part of making sense of why I am where I am right now. And it also brings a lot of sense of empowerment. It's also you carry a sense of burden because you're sort of carrying this trauma, as you said, this exclusion, as you mentioned, Adele, which is actually very true.
I didn't mention trauma at all or exclusion, just to be clear. Those were not my words. And I know you and Gervin are kind of sort of, I don't know, like pivoting towards that way, but that's not actually what I mean.
For myself, not what I mean. Because for me, exclusion include trauma.
My apologies. My computer is dying. It needs to be plugged in.
Okay.
It's dying. It will go off the air just shortly. Sorry about that.
Thank you for letting us know, Lennox.
And you have it plugged in somewhere.
Thank you for letting us know.
Let me just finish my point, because I think this does work its way into the history that we bring as individuals, as scholars. For me, it is based on trauma. It is based on exclusion. It's based on the fact of my own social political geography, coming from South Africa, being born there, coming as a refugee, without any choice of my own, but my parents were escaping, the confines of living in South Africa at the time. So that does carry a certain memory of trauma that then I think informs some of the work that I do to bring about change for other people. And so when I mentioned that, I should have mentioned my own self rather than alluding to all Black people. But I think that's really good, because we do come from such complex backgrounds. And in a sense, we do have to untie what those mean to us as we work within these institutions and try and advance some of our own desires for change in what we do. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. It's a good discussion.
Thank you so much. Lennox?
Yes, if I could continue on one vein mentioned, and I appreciate the dialogue, free and uninhibited and uninhibiting. I noticed in our ranks here we have people of all backgrounds and races, and so. And in reflecting on what occurred then, what is happening now, and where we are part of, Simon made mention of Harriet Tubman, the professor also of dislocation. And one of the things that strikes me, among the things, two or three things strike me, is how immediate are examples of the continuing history we face. Each time how current are the evidences of slavery, of emancipation, of those kinds of things? They're immediate. If you were to go to any Caribbean country, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, part of their national dish is codfish. Anyone here had heard Ackee codfish? In Trinidad, the bullgel and codfish. That's linked directly to slavery, where the slaves that make the sugar and the rum ship to Canada, and Canada would ship the codfish. And for example, in the US, the significance of slavery to the economy and to the development of the whole society at every level. For example, we have what we call Wall Street. As all of you know, Wall Street is built by slaves. It's so central to the economy and the development of this hemisphere was enslavement. And with regards to the Harriet Tubman and the fleeing from Canada into the US, one, we speak today in countries like the US of having healthcare, the best healthcare. Do you know who are the first people in this hemisphere to have the best healthcare? Black female slaves. The significance of that is that they had to breed. They were an engine. They weren't humans. So the first people to have healthcare, or free healthcare, were the black female slaves. The question of the policing linked to the policing, then linked to policing, you had the paterolas. You heard of them? They would patrol to recapture enslaved people who were trying to flee, or you then called runaways. In Jamaica, by the way, there's a bay called Runaway Bay. That is a testimony to these threads of history that are with us. And these paterolas would patrol any black person they met. They had a right to stop them, see what papers they had to show they were escaping. And when they were not patrolling, they had a number of contingencies placed on them. Among those, that they had to instill terror into the minds of the black people. So the paterolas, they were the runaways. And in a sense, as a black man, as a young black man, as a younger person, I am not I don't experience it with the same degree as I was as a younger man. It is as though we were, or we are still at large. We're no longer runaways, but we are at large. If anyone sees you, I saw that in the US, that woman who was challenging that man who was watching birds, like a black man doing this. We are still, wherever we are, at large. And anyone seeing us, we aren't runaways, but there's still that kind of mentality that is attached to us as black people. And one concluding point, among the people who sat with us at the table when we met with the Peterson government, and I want to mention him among others, there was Dr. Peter Rosenthal. Professor, you know him? Peter Rosenthal? He was a professor of mathematics at the University of Toronto. You know what Peter did? 2 years ago, I took my grandkids, everybody, and we met him in Toronto, had a meal. I wanted them to meet him and take pictures with him. I told him whenever I was in jail somewhere, 2 in the morning, I could tell when my lawyer comes. I said before, they don't call me Leonard and say Mr. Farris. Oh, my lawyer is here. Peter Rosenthal. Peter went deliberately and did a course in law as a lawyer in order to take young black men out of prison. And that brings me to the question that we had earlier, and maybe the last major point I'll make, the question of opportunity of participation. Yeah, I moved by the idea of truth, and moved by it because we live in a hemisphere, and it is not my idea. I heard it from someone. I wish I could remember the name to quote them. We live in a world that exists between the power and the pain. And the farther you are away from the power, the closer you are to the pain. It sounds simplistic, but it at least puts things in a kind of perspective that is easily digestible and understandable, at least to me in that sense. And for any one of us, all of us, for each of us, in my opinion, the challenge is, as I tell my grandchildren, as you live your life, don't go looking for opportunities to do better. Be the opportunity needed to make the change. Don't look for that opportunity. Be the opportunity. Wherever you are, you be that person. The power of the pain to move people more to the power and away from the pain. And so, as I see or array of individuals here, I feel a deep sense that of a sense of encouragement, and a sense that when we got together with Batsy, people like Dudley and Charlie and Peter and Nakua and so, they're quite ordinary people. But we eventually forced the government, the Peterson government, to come to the table with the SIA. I will stop there. As I get older, I talk more than I should sometimes, so I have to be reminded to talk.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated that. And you actually touched on a couple of the questions that I wanted to ask but didn't get to, so I really greatly appreciate that. I know that, Gervin, you had a couple final words that you'd like to add, and then we can move into the close. This has been a really great panel so far. Thank you, everyone.
I think Lennox's statement it really sums up a core point for me. And Lennox, you may not know this, but you were just ahead of the class of Francis Jeffers at University of Toronto. And Francis Jeffers and my brother Al were there too. So, and that means that some of your work and leadership inspired them, and they inspired me, and so on. And I think the point being said is that we each, in our own action and in our own deeds, have an opportunity to inspire others and be that classic statement, the change that we're speaking of in that regard. And I think that everyone on the panel, in all the comments they've made, inspire others. And I think that's how we create new possibilities despite challenges. And that's, to me, is where what gives me a sense of hopefulness. So in some senses, this is maybe a long time coming. So for my brother Al, when I told him that you were going to be on, he said, thanks. Here it is. I'm telling you thanks 40 years later. So, yeah, I will.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists. I know Adil had to leave early, but I really appreciate her insights as well. So I would just like to thank everyone for speaking, and I learned a lot and love to hear actually more about what everyone has to say. So you might be getting emails from me on the side for further conversation. I definitely will be emailing you, Lennox. So I greatly appreciate hearing and learning from each of you. And for folks who were just joining us or unable to catch the panel, there will be a recording available for review. You can contact me at khenry, that's KHENRY, like the chocolate bar, at brocu.ca. If you'd like a copy of the footage, I'll get in contact with the right folks. I know that, Simon, you have some words that you'd like to share in terms of moving things forward into the next section.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Katawe, for doing such an excellent job moderating and for navigating those technical difficulties with such grace. I know I would have not been able to have done that. So thank you. For folks who are watching from home, there's a second screening. We'll be starting shortly at dusk in the backyard of the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre. Up It Takes a Riot, Race Reform Rebellion. It will be followed by a screening of Wilma, which is a documentary about the late, great Wilma Morrison, who was really a custodian of Black history in Niagara, with an introduction from the director of that film, Ayo Adewumi. So I would encourage folks, if you're in the St. Catharines or Niagara area, to come down, bring a blanket, and join us behind the PAAC on St. Paul Street. And thank you all to the panelists, and thank you again, Katawe.
That's you too, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Hi, Gervin.